一段沉痛的历史，60年铭心刻骨的记忆。第2次世界大战中，600万犹太人在欧洲悲惨地死去，而逃到上海的近3万犹太人却幸存下来。3集纪录片《逃亡上海》用丰富的史料和众多亲历者的肺腑之言，在记录历史的同时，还诉说了许多动人心弦的故事。
观众朋友，大家好，欢迎收看纪录片编辑室节目。观众朋友，今天我们要给您讲述的是发生在60年前的一段真实的历史。当时呢，为了躲避德国纳粹的迫害，近3万犹太难民逃亡到了上海。后来呢，他们自称是上海犹太人。这几年知道这段历史的人是越来越多了，然而问题还在于故事后面的故事。例如，从地理上来说，上海和德国远隔千山万水，这3万犹太难民为什么不逃到离德国比较近的国家，比方说号称中立国的瑞士去呢？红十字的旗帜不是满世界飘扬吗？再比如，当时的上海正在日本法西斯的铁蹄下呻吟，那么这3万犹太难民为什么不逃到像美国、英国这样的富有国家去呢？再比如，从文化和语言上来说，当时的西方不是都在说中国的文化落后，中国的语言难懂吗？那么这3万长期生长在西方文化背景下的犹太难民是怎样在上海生活的呢？他们又是如何同中国人交往的呢？再比如，当时的上海呢已经被日本法西斯占领，那么日本人对这3万上海犹太人又是持什么样的态度呢？为了解开这些历史之谜，我们拍摄了系列纪录片《逃亡上海》。今天呢，就请收看第1集《避难》。
To remember terrible things that people can do to people, and that these type of Holocaust should never happen again. That's very important. 6 million people to be murdered because of who they are and who they were. It's very bad.
The Jews who made their way out and found a haven in places that these refugees never dreamed of going before. All of a sudden they went to a new world, and they found a new life there.
1938年11月9日晚上，德国法西斯捣毁了大批犹太人的商店、会堂和住所，一个新的、更大规模的反犹浪潮开始了。成千上万的犹太人离开家园，四处寻找他们的避难场所。
没有立足之地。
Germans were unprepared for the amount of prisoners that they had and had nothing to do with them, so they slowly let them out. My father was one of the first people to be let out of Dachau.
So the people suffered too much. Then I'm lucky to get a telegram as America, from America. Telegram von 3 Wetze, Shanghai Ausreise in order.
This is my mother, my grandmother. Those are all taken in Shanghai. Life was nice. It was good for everybody in Germany. My parents had a good youth. They grew up, they went to school, they had friends, they made excursions, they enjoyed life to the fullest. And then when Hitler came in 1933, we saw the handwriting on the wall. We saw things were beginning to change.
Erhoben. Damals gelobte ich mir zum ersten Mal, als unbekannter Eiserner diesen Krieg zu beginnen und nicht zu ruhen, dies endlich, diese Erscheinung
anti-Semitism began to go on rampant. It became worse and worse until we had to leave.
1933年希特勒上台前后，一部分犹太人就设法逃离家乡。这时候，包括欧美在内的世界各国还没有抵制犹太人，所以他们还能够顺利地迁移到各个国家。从这个时候起，一直到1937年夏天，已经有1000多个犹太人千里迢迢来到上海。
The refugees had a very, very tough time in the beginning. Later, but they were very, very fortunate because the Chinese were very good to the refugees.
To the people, yes.
To the people, to the German refugees. The Chinese were very, very good to the refugees. The Chinese people were good to everybody. Unfortunately, the war started with the Japanese and created a lot of problems for many people, for the foreigners as well as for the Chinese as well as for everybody.
When where we lived at that time on Bublingwell Road, from the top of our apartment building, they had the Chinese had their guns out to try and get the Japanese. You know, it was terrible, terrible time. My son was like about 5 years old there, and he used to go by and he used to salute to the gendarme. It was so funny.
I lived there 20 years. I grew up in China. I went to school in China. I grew up in China.
We have nothing but the best of times, and we got married there. We had our children there, and we left in 1947, right after the war. And that's
I worked over there. I worked for the telephone company.
同样是为了逃避纳粹的迫害，原来居住在德国法兰克福的犹太女孩安妮·弗兰克一家，却不是东去上海，而是西行到了荷兰的阿姆斯特丹。当时谁也没有料想到，命运之舟会把这位小姑娘送到哪儿去。不过，这时候大部分犹太人还有幻想。
Alle haben gemeint, das ist ein großes Volk, die Deutschen sind ein großes Volk, es ist das Volk der Dichter und der Denker, das Volk von Goethe und Schiller, von Beethoven und von Mozart. In diesem Volk, dieses Volk, da kann es nicht so schlimm werden, dass wir ums Leben kommen.
Countries of places that were willing to accept Jews were very, very few. In fact, one historian, David Wyman, calls it the abandonment of the Jews. The Jews were abandoned. Everybody washed their hands of the Jews and said, we're not going to do anything about it.
德国的邻国瑞士封锁了边境线，还出告示禁止犹太人进入。这个犹太孩子进入瑞士以后，又被驱逐出境，最后被送进了波兰的奥斯维辛集中营。
I think that the foreign countries feared that they had to provide with food and everything the refugees.
1939年5月13日，一艘名叫圣路易士号的轮船载着944名犹太人离开德国汉堡港，向古巴驶去。但是古巴和美国都拒绝他们上岸。6月4日，圣路易士号停泊在离迈阿密港口几英里远的地方，向美国政府发出了求助信息，但是一直没有得到丝毫的回应。
Länder in der Welt, die uns hätten Aufnahme geben können, aber nicht Aufnahme gegeben haben, wie insbesondere die westeuropäischen Länder, aber auch die Vereinigten Staaten. obwohl sie gewusst haben, wie sehr bedrängt die Juden sind. Obwohl vorhersehbar gewesen ist, dass diese Bedrängnis in einem kommenden Krieg noch viel, viel größer werden könnte. Auch wenn diese Länder nicht wissen konnten, dass die Juden ermordet werden würden. Sie sind mitschuldig daran, an diesem Holocaust.
Where shall I go? There is no place for me.
告诉我应该走向何方，因为我没有立足之地。
Shanghai was the last possibility to get out of Germany when Shanghai the last problem.
What had happened was, at that time, without a passport, without a visa, you were unable to go anywhere out of Germany. So China was the last opportunity for people who had no visa to escape Germany, and luckily my father was able to get the Conta Rosa out of Venice to go to Shanghai in 1939.
My father had a friend who was an illegal Nazi. He had known my father for a long time, and he said, "Jack, you've got to get out of Vienna, out of Austria." My father said, "Why?" "Because there is something going to happen to the Jews." So my father was very upset at this, and he made plans to leave Austria already in the summer. Now there's a little story that Pepe Crack told my father. "You cannot go anywhere. Nobody wants the Jews. I know of a place where you can go without papers, without visas." My father said, "And what is this place?" And he said, "Shanghai. You don't need anything but a ticket on a ship, and you can go to Shanghai." We did this.
Eine der ganz wenigen Territorien in der Welt, in die Juden gehen konnten, war Shanghai. Deswegen sind meine Eltern 1939 von Hamburg nach Shanghai gefahren. Sie haben sich auf dem Schiff kennengelernt und haben dann 1939 noch in Shanghai geheiratet.
This is where the store was. When we came to Shanghai, we didn't have much. And let me say something here. Every refugee that lived in Shanghai, that has been in Shanghai, every Jewish refugee, is very grateful to China and will never forget China.
We crossed by train from Vienna to Genoa, and we boarded the ship in November of '38. The ship took about 4 weeks to get to Shanghai via the Suez Canal, the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, and then the China Sea, Hong Kong. We stopped a lot of times. When the ship finally arrived in Shanghai, up the Huangpu River.
20世纪30年代的上海已经是远东一座最大的城市。自从1840年鸦片战争以后，上海逐渐成了中国最大的通商口岸。上海还有许多外国人控制的租界，其中的一个租界是日本的。1937年，日本发动的一次新的侵略战争，给上海带来了巨大的灾难。
After the fighting in 1937, Japan occupied a larger part of the international settlement. That's the crucial part. They controlled whoever comes in. By 1936, a Japanese policy started to evolve because of the Japanese officers who studied Jews and Judaism. They helped to influence the Japanese government to being good to the Jews. And if they reasoned, if we are good to the Jews, they will help us, just like the Jews in 1904 loaned us money to win the war against Russia.
在1904年到1905年的日俄战争紧要关头，纽约库恩洛布公司董事长，一个叫西夫的德国犹太人，筹集了几笔巨款借给日本，帮助日本打败了俄国。从此， 日本人就产生了犹太人掌握着美国以至世界金融大权的深刻印象。
If the Jews are rich and powerful, then let's use that power on behalf of Japanese interests. So we're going to let the Jews in. We can convince them to convince their Jewish brethren in the United States to help Japan.
And we came off the ship, and there was a welcoming van or truck. We loaded all our possessions onto the van, and we spent our first night in Shanghai.
从1937年到1939年8月是犹太难民涌入上海的高峰期。2万多犹太难民怀着生的希望进入上海。原先就在上海生活的2个犹太人社团，即塞夫拉迪社团和阿兹肯纳奇社团，伸出了援助之手。沙逊、哈同、加道里等犹太富商纷纷捐钱捐物。中国教会和其他一些慈善团体、救济组织也参加了救援活动。国外犹太人捐助的钱物开始源源而来。除少数难民自行租房居住以外，大多数难民都住进了临时租用或搭建的难民收容所，一般30至50人住一间房子。生活虽然艰苦，但生命却保了下来。只是他们无法想象纳粹的暴行究竟会发展到何种程度。
I was a young boy in Poland, about 16 years old, when the war broke out, September 1, 1939. And at that time I was in school, so I didn't know much about politics. I lived a very nice life. My parents were well-to-do. My father was in the importing business.
落到了纳粹手里。
Where shall I go? There is no place for me.
告诉我应该走向何方，因为我没有立足之地。
波兰一个叫密尔的城市有一座欧洲最古老的犹太经学院。1941年8月，密尔经学院的400多名师生经过长途跋涉，穿过西伯利亚，途经日本神户，到达上海，在这座城市里奇迹般地生存了下来。
It was wartime. We know approximately what was going on there. At least here we lived quiet. Nobody touched us, and nobody said anything. When we heard a lot of stories, Hitler had killed thousands of people, and we considered it as a miracle that this whole group was saved. And in complete went to Shanghai, and we had no connection before, and we came there and we found rooms. The Chinese rented us rooms for small money, and we lived door by door. We were not afraid to go out 1 o'clock at night in the street. It was like a hometown in that respect. Never anybody touched us.
第2次世界大战以后，密尔经学院一部分师生没有回故乡，而是从上海迁移到了美国纽约。现在这座经学院的学生已经增加到3000人。
The time we were in Shanghai, we didn't know. Not only that, but I even received correspondence from my parents quite late until 1942. I even have my sister got married. So until 1942, perhaps the middle or the end of 42, I was in correspondence with my parents, and everything looked difficult but livable. And still, we were hoping, because some people survived the war. Everybody was hoping maybe they send away to Russia, but the 300,000-400,000 people ran away to Siberia. They survived the war. And from concentration camps, still about maybe 5% or 10% survived. So everybody was hoping maybe my family will survive. In fact, Some people did find a brother, a sister, father, mother. I was not fortunate enough, and my family consisted perhaps of several hundred people. My father and my mother came from a family of 12 children, and so we have no way of knowing how many perished. The fact is, nobody survived. I was alone. It was very difficult, and this is a part of the tragedy, of the Jewish tragedy, that the high price we paid for this terrible, terrible war in Europe. So I really didn't know. Until the war was over, we had no idea what's happening. I found out, I knew everything was lost at about 15 years ago. I went back to Poland. I took a trip with my wife, and I went to my town, and I found somebody alive who told me that he together with my parents, my whole family, and his family were sent away to Treblinka. And he told me exactly the day when everyone was sent to the gas chambers. So more or less I know the day that they all perished. Very, very unfortunate and very, very sad story. And the world knows now what happened. So.
德国柏林郊区的瓦恩湖是一处著名的游览胜地。1942年，差不多在本杰明·费什夫等近2000名波兰犹太人从陆路辗转到达上海的同时，纳粹党头子却在这里召开会议，决定在整个欧洲范围内屠杀犹太人。他们请来了专家，在各个集中营建造了毒气室和焚尸炉。惨绝人寰的大屠杀就在这批刽子手的指令下开始了。波兰奥斯维辛集中营是纳粹头目直接控制的灭绝营，200万犹太人在这里死于非命。
In 1939, we escaped from Germany and were lucky to get into Italy. And in Italy, I was caught by the Germans. In 1943, they invaded Italy. And when I came to Italy, we were caught and taken to Auschwitz. And arriving in Auschwitz, we were about 1,500 people. And most of them went right away to the gas chambers. So they didn't know. They told them to go in the shower, and instead of water, they came gas, you know, and they were all killed. And 13 people, I was under the 13 people were taken for work. The week, the Germans choose selection. They took Jews who were already weak and couldn't work, and they took him to the gas chambers and killed them. And then they took us and they put in a number on the hand, and this was your number. You have no more name. They called you by the number, and this was your name. I wish I could escape to China. We were too young, and not everybody got the papers to go to China. So otherwise, a lot of people would have been saved. According to history, you know, all the Jews in China survived. Though they were in ghettos, it was war and everything, but I heard they were never harmed by the Chinese people. I wish I would be able to be in Shanghai. I wouldn't go through all this problem, you know.
其实，随着日本和德国这两个法西斯国家的日益亲近，上海犹太人的处境也越来越恶化了。这时候，从欧洲通往上海的海上、陆上的道路也都已中断，从此能够逃到上海的犹太人已寥寥无几。1941年，德国驻日本首席代表梅辛格到达上海，执行希特勒最终解决犹太人计划。尽管日本当局没有执行，但是珍珠港事件的爆发毕竟给上海犹太人带来了严重的影响。
Japan has attacked our territory and murdered American citizens. Japan began this war in treachery. We shall end it in victory.
the day, December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The situation changed dramatically. The Japanese took over Shanghai, the whole area. There was not an area in Shanghai that was not ruled by the Japanese.
Japanese policy was most effective in 1938 through 1941, till Pearl Harbor. Then it diminished, and also German propaganda became more influential. Now that the war started with Japan and Germany on one side, German propaganda on Japan concerning the Jews became stronger. And the Japanese were under a lot of pressure by the Germans to put them into a ghetto.
位于上海东部的虹口地区就此成了犹太人的隔离区。
When the Japanese created what they called the designated area in Hongkou, but still, my family again was in the fortunate position to be able to re-establish themselves there, and while we lived under more crowded conditions.
犹太人隔离区的正式称呼是无国籍难民特定居住区，犹太人不得随意进出这个区域，但是他允许那些在隔离区外面工作的犹太人在工作期间凭通行证暂时离开这个区域。就这样，近万名已经在虹口地区以外获得了生计和住所的犹太人，再次被迫舍弃自己的家庭和事业，同原来就居住在虹口地区的10万名中国人和近万名犹太人一起，挤进了这块不到1平方英里的狭小空间里。
Alle jüdischen Familien und alle mit Kindern natürlich mussten sich in Hongkou niederlassen. Und wir wohnten da in einem, aus meiner Erinnerung, in einem sehr großen Haus mit vielen, vielen, ich glaube beinahe mehreren 100 Menschen. Und ja, für uns Kinder war die Zeit sicherlich nicht so belastend wie für unsere Eltern. Wir Kinder sind so gut wie es ging sehr gut behütet worden. Und wir haben keine irgendwelche schlechten Erfahrungen gemacht.
隔离区不同于集中营，犹太人喜欢的各种文化体育活动照样进行。同样是犹太姑娘，1933年跟随父母从法兰克福逃到荷兰阿姆斯特丹的安妮·弗兰克，在她13岁生日，也就是1942年6月12日那天开始记日记。1个月以后，为了躲避已经占领荷兰的德国纳粹的迫害，她随家人躲进了阿姆斯特丹的这座密室，一躲就躲了2年，她的日记也就记了2年。这就是后来闻名世界的安妮日记。上海犹太难民并没有放弃对孩子的教育。
Hongkou was like a Jewish ghetto. It was surrounded by wire. Nobody could go in, nobody could go out. So life was very difficult for them. But the school was located in Hongkou. So every day I went to Hongkou to school.
I remember a lot. It was very difficult for us to learn the Chinese language. And that made it difficult. My peers were mostly also refugee children that I went to school with, that I played with.
I lived there for an important part of my life. I went to school there. I first learned English, you see, because the schools I went to were taught in English. And then I learned Chinese later on.
也许近3万犹太难民在上海所做的最有意义的一件事，就是重视教育，培养人才。后来，一批批少年成了各方面出类拔萃的杰出人物。1944年8月1日，安妮记完了她最后一篇日记。3天以后，因有人告密被捕了。1944年10月，安妮从波兰的奥斯维辛集中营被解往德国的贝根贝尔森集中营，大约在1945年3月初去世。这时候离她的16岁生日只有3个月了。第2次世界大战结束以后，大部分犹太难民离开了上海。又是半个世纪过去了，据不完全统计，当年各奔前程的3万上海犹太难民，如今健在的只剩下1000人了。
Deutsche Bürger, die wegen ihrer jüdischen Religion verfolgt waren und sich nach China retteten, kehrten jetzt in die Heimat zurück. Nach 9-jährigem Aufenthalt verließen sie Shanghai, um in Berlin ein neues Leben zu beginnen. Nur ein Teil von ihnen findet Familienangehörige oder Freunde vor. Sie wissen, dass es bei uns Entbehrungen und alle Schwierigkeiten einer Nachkriegszeit zu ertragen gibt. Die Tatsache ihrer freiwilligen Rückkunft macht uns daher umso größeren Eindruck.
Wir hätten in China bleiben können, aber wir haben Sehnsucht nach der Heimat gehabt.
Ich bin im Jahre 1940 nach Shanghai gegangen und jetzt hierher nach Deutschland zurückgekehrt, da ich 84 Jahre alt bin, um mein Lebensabend hier zu beschließen bei meinen Kindern.
I arrived when I was 13 years old, and I lived there until I was 22. So this is a very important part of one's life. And so many things, very often, people asked me, when they asked me, where did you learn this? Where did you find out about this? I said, in Shanghai, because during that period I lived in Shanghai.
When I was in Shanghai, I was alone, one boy. I came to the United States in 1947. I got married, and I had 5 children. My 5 children, thank God, they have today 26 grandchildren. So total, we are now, my wife and I, we total of 38 people. So when you think of saving one person in Shanghai, the Chinese government, through the generosity, through the kindness of the government, they saved one person. In reality, they saved at least 38 living today, and who knows how many hundreds in the future. So out of the 25,000 people we had in Shanghai, if you multiply by same proportion, we're talking about 1 million people, so who knows how many.
I had very good life in Shanghai.
You were young and you had a
young.
good time.
I grew up there. I married my wife.
Yeah, we're going
My
to
children were born there. So I have very, very tender memories of Shanghai and the Chinese people. So I can never forget. I get very choked up inside when somebody says ask me about China. Shanghai to me was my life. I'm 80 years old now. So to me, the Chinese people and Shanghai is my life. I know no other life.
And so most of the Jews who lived in Shanghai remember that the people of Shanghai saved their lives. And they remember too that they were able to live in the city and function productively in their businesses.
I think that when people started to listen to each other and to tolerate, that life could be much easier and nicer, you know, like you have a different religion, I have a different religion, respecting each other, and that's all what is about life, to have respect for other people, what they are doing, and they should have respect to us, what we are doing. I mean, to have a different opinion or a different religion doesn't kill nobody. You can discuss things, you know, and you still can live in peace and have a wonderful life.
观众朋友，近3万犹太难民在上海避难，终于避开了德国纳粹的大屠杀。战后，他们中的大部分人陆续的离开了上海，散居到世界各地，一小部分呢留了下来。那么他们后来的命运如何呢？他们和上海又有什么样的联系呢？请大家在下周的同一时间收看《逃亡上海》的第2集重聚。
1939年秋天，曼弗雷德·沃姆的父亲逃离纳粹监视后，乘上开往上海的轮船，在船上认识了他的母亲。而喜爱绘画的聋哑孤儿也是在上海找到了自己的中国知己。这一幕幕铭心刻骨的回忆，一个个撼人心弦的故事，记下了20世纪人类历史上的一页篇章。上市1套10月18日版纪录片编辑室播出《逃亡上海》第2集重聚。
好了，观众朋友，今天的节目呢就为大家播放到这儿了，感谢收看，让我们下周同一时间再见。